Hi, welcome to President's Day weekend. For today's lunch alert, I'd like to talk a little bit about one of those men we celebrate, George Washington, who was truly the indispensable man. We really don't understand how much the entire Revolutionary War depended on George Washington. Washington understood something that really had not become conventional wisdom until the Vietnam War, which was that as long as the army existed, the rebellion could go on. The American army became essentially a stand-in for the rebellion. Now, normally, if you captured the enemy's capital or disrupted their legislative assembly, you could crush the rebellion. But he realized that geography didn't matter. What mattered was that the army stay there. So he was very successful at the start of the war in occupying Boston. And then how the British general went down to invade New York, and Washington got clobbered. He got clobbered in Brooklyn, and then in a battle of Lower Manhattan, and then a battle of Upper Manhattan, and then across in Fort Lee, New Jersey, defeat after defeat with huge losses. And his army was reduced to 4,000 or 5,000 men. I mean, a tiny little army. It had been 30 or 40,000 outside of Boston. And he retreated down the whole length of New Jersey, and the cause was finished. This rebellion was basically over. And on Christmas Day of 1776, Washington decided to cross the Delaware River and to attack the Hessians, who were the mercenaries who were working for the British, in Trenton on Christmas Day. And it was an amazing move to take 3,000 men with poor clothing and small boats with ice all over the river and do a surprise attack at dawn. It was incredible, and it worked. He won, and then he won a subsequent battle at Princeton, and he sent the British reeling back in retreat all the way across northern New Jersey to New York City, where they holed up for the winter. And that basically saved the revolution, because as soon as that happened, France came into the war on the American side, which meant a constant flow of arms. 90% of our military arms came from France, and it really meant that we would have a chance to win. Then he proceeded with the Revolutionary War and won, a brilliant move in marching his whole army down from New Jersey all the way to Virginia to fight at the Battle of Yorktown, which was the key battle. But then came really his proudest moment, when the troops, but the officers of the rebel army, the Continental Army, hadn't been paid, and they were furious about it, and they were talking about marching on Congress to demand their back pay in gold, not Continentals, which had become worthless. And Washington met with them at Fraunces Tavern, and he spoke to them about his own service. At one point, he moved them all to tears when he had to put on his eyeglasses to read his speech. And he said, "I've lost my eyesight in the service of my country." And he persuaded them to go home. And he set up the Cincinnatus Society, named after the Roman general who, after he won the wars, went back to his plow, as opposed to Julius Caesar, who toppled the Republic. And he was really responsible for there not being a military coup at that point. Then he retired to Mount Vernon and came out to preside at the Constitutional Convention, lend his prestige to it, although he didn't play an active role in writing the document. And he was the consensus first president. And he had a very good first presidency. He did a lot of good stuff, set up all kinds of precedents. But the most important precedent he set was when he left. In 1796, he announced he was not going to run for a third term as president, and he retired to Mount Vernon, where he died 3 years later. Had Washington died in office, the whole precedent would have been president for life, like a lot of these tin horn dictatorships. So for a second time, he saved American democracy with the same remedy: go home. After you win a war, go home. Don't run a coup d'etat. And after 2 terms as president, go home. Don't make yourself dictator for life. Those 2 actions, both abnegations really, were incredibly important in the development of our country as it is today. Now, to go from the exalted to the ridiculous, it's President's Day weekend, and our book, Dubs Goes to Washington, chronicles Dubs' adventures in meeting the great leaders, or at least their monuments. So he goes to the Lincoln Memorial, and he gets himself all tied up in his leash. And he says, at the memorial for Abraham Lincoln, Dub sat up and started thinking, if man from chains is meant to be free, can someone get this silly leash off of me? So you can get this book at dickmorris.com or at amazon.com. It's a good read. It'll teach your kids to realize what President's Weekend is all about.